Okay, so as you may recall, I drew the analogy of these core web technologies, as you recall, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Whereas HTML provides the structure, like the frame of the house, CSS makes it livable, I guess. You know, it puts paint on the walls, sets the countertops. These are always the examples I'm drawing from. We're going to cover some basics. We're going to get into this language. So as you recall from just a few seconds ago, where we're talking about attributes and tags and all this kind of stuff. So there's some loose parallels here between HTML and CSS. A big part of what you're learning here is just the lingo that we use. And we're going to talk about that lingo in the context of selectors. Oh, and properties as well. So selectors and properties and all this. More language, stuff for you to learn today. And this is probably the most important thing you take away. So every browser, when you create your web page, and this is all you've been exposed to so far, are the default styles. Once upon a time when browsers were much more diverse, it really made a big difference what browser you're looking at your web page on. This is less and less true. Probably the biggest offender in this uncertainty is Internet Explorer. That may change just because there's sort of been a cultural change at Microsoft. So I expect to be a more homogeneous approach to these default stylings. So, but as you've seen in some of the basic web pages we've created, very plain. Typically just Times New Roman, black and white, very austere, right? It's like going into a house with no drywall, or at least with no paint on the walls. So that's what CSS does. Browsers have their own style. We've seen these H1 and these H2, very minimalistic, definitely does change the appearance, but not dramatically. Each of these elements has certain styles, like P has margins. So when you put text inside of a P tag, the space from the edges of the screen will increase slightly. With CSS, you can, of course, set these margins to any width or to no width whatsoever. Can you guys think of any others? Just in your own limited experience, or even in your broader experience of having used the World Wide Web? Think of, I'm trying to think of a good one. How about the anchor tag? Anchor tag has a default style. The link is always blue. It always has an underline. That's not true of a web page that has had new styles applied to it, right? So that would be another example of a browser default, the blue. And then when you click on it, it usually turns purple. Yes, and with CSS, we can set these to whatever we want. First thing, and I think you guys have done this a little bit from last day, you included a link tag in the head of your document. So don't worry about taking notes or trying it out. We'll build a web page from scratch when it comes to demo time. But we have to have some way to tell our web page, well, at this point, it's just a web page. It's not a web application. But we have to have some way to bring all these things together. That we define right up at the top in the head. Remember, this is all the stuff that gets loaded first before anything's actually displayed to the screen. Stuff you should already be familiar with. The link tag. I'm not sure what rel stands for. Every single time I see it, I wonder.
Relation?
Maybe. I don't know. If you're curious, I don't know, to get onto Wikipedia and see if you can find out what it means. I'm pretty sure href just means hypertext reference. But you'll notice here, and this is kind of what I was alluding to before, there's no HTTP here. Does anyone know what these dots mean?
Core file?
Nope.
Go up level
In your
file system.
Exactly, yes. So the dot when you're using Linux or Well, even DOS, that always meant in your file tree to one directory higher. By contrast, a single dot means the directory that you're sitting in. If I remember, I'll show you what I mean on the command line when we get to Cloud 9. But a couple of attributes, a tag, this all comes together as an element loaded inside of the head of the document. And before anything's displayed, it refers to this lib.css style sheet. So this is the name of the style sheet itself. This tells us where to find it. And the browser uses this to display the page, to override those default values. So here's the very basics. This is the lingo we're talking about. The selector matches to, well, one of a few things. It could match the tag itself. So if you're talking in terms of the P, the paragraph tag, or the A, the anchor tag, we can just plop that in the spot where this selector is sitting. And anything we put between these two curly braces, and you see the opening one up there, is going to somehow affect the way it is displayed on the screen. There's also other ones we can use. We'll actually get that in just a second. But inside of these, every one of these selectors, this is what identifies what we're trying to style on the page, has certain characteristics we call properties. Just like when you're assigning values to attributes, you assign a value to the property. This is, very high level overview, so it might not make full sense until we actually see it. But as with defining an HTML element, you have to be very mindful of opening and closing syntax. So here, we declare our selector. We let's tell the browser everything between these curly braces. This applies to that selector that we've defined up here. Then we list the various properties. It could be font size, it could be color, it could be some sort of animation effect. We define that on the left, just like with the attribute, and then we assign it a value. So whereas the attribute in HTML we assign using the equal sign, this one we just make these key value pairs. Here's the value or the property we want to change. Here's the value that we want to assign to it. Sometimes we put them between quotation marks, sometimes not. It depends. So here's an example of the P tag. So this, if you have a paragraph in your web page, you put the margin, set the margin at 5 pixels. That's what the PX stands for. There's all sorts of different measurements you can use. This is arguably the most primitive one, I suppose. By doing that, any text contained inside of a P tag, for every P tag, is going to have margins of 5 pixels. And I suspect that's actually a lot less than what it defaults to, but I'm not entirely sure. So, selector, which element do you want to change? You can get as specific as you want. The P tag here is obviously very broad. It's going to be every single P tag.
So that applies to your whole page.
Well, to the page that you loaded this CSS file into, yes. The property, so in this case, we want to change the margin. We want to make it, I suspect this actually makes it narrower. And we select that, we declare that property, we assign it a value separated by that colon. And the value, there we are. So the 5px. There's all sorts of different units of measurement. Px is, as I said, probably arguably the most primitive. There's also EMs, which depends on the size of the screen. There's also vertical height, vertical width, all very powerful stuff. I'll show you a little bit of a demonstration using vertical height when it comes to demo time. So all this to say, okay, so these are very broad. We have an A tag, anchor tag, we have the P tag. Anything we change inside of this is going to apply to everything. We don't have to be so broad. We can get much more specific. So, for example, This top one here, if I can find my mouse, where's my mouse? Is everyone seeing the screen okay? Okay. With this top definition, this only applies to anchor tags contained or nested inside of that nav semantic tag. So if you can imagine this, we know nav probably pertains to navigation, whether it's at the head or the foot or the side, wherever it may be. You can declare styles here. So, you know, the default style is blue. Maybe, I don't know, in the header tag, you want it to be green or something like that. You declare it there, and everything up in the head, anything nested inside the nav is going to turn green. Anything outside the nav is going to be the default style. Same here, article. There may very well be a distinction on your page between, say, like, I don't know, it could be like a scientific paper or something like that. You're going to have an article for publication. This might be different than what you would do inside of a novel, for example. And you see this all the time. I mean, you open up a book, sometimes the words go right to the edge. Sometimes the text is very large. You know, it totally depends, and that's true of web pages as well. I always refer to this as typesetting. I'm not sure if that's appropriate when we're talking about web pages, but yeah, that's just always what I called it. This one down here at the bottom demonstrates that you can pretty much nest these as deep as you want. Again, very specific. You can create a selector that identifies one specific element on your page or no element whatsoever. And this is actually a very common construct. Does anyone know what the UL stands for? I keep losing my mouse. There it is. This UL right here. Which one?
Unordered list.
Unordered list, as opposed to OL, of course, which will give you 1, 2, 3. The unordered list gives you bullets. So anything inside the nav, and for each of these list items, they're creating some sort of menu. This is something you see pretty frequently. Typically, this will remove the bullet, and instead of having one after the other, it'll line them up right across the top. Very, very common thing to do with CSS. So, more specific. Now, when we're talking about class, we're talking about that class attribute, right? So now we're kind of going back to HTML. Here we have the class. We've declared this this element a button type. We classified it as a button, I suppose. And we referenced this particular class in CSS with this this period. So if you're talking about a class, you put a dot before the class name, and then you follow that standard syntax with the curly braces and the properties and all that. You can change it to look however you want. So what this means is that any sort of, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a link like it is here. It could be a submit button, say on a form. It could even be a paragraph. It doesn't even really matter. You can assign these classes to anything. If you're calling it a button, it probably makes sense to have it something that you click on. But there's no stopping you from just doing it to whatever. It could be like, you know, even a header tag like H1 or whatever. Here's another one, thumbnail. So maybe someone's making a really small image that they've uploaded. The other one, now this is getting much more specific. Whereas classes, you can have these appear multiple times on the screen. This is more of a convention than an actual rule. If you have an ID, there's really only supposed to be one, right? There's nothing stopping you at all from having multiple IDs with the same value assigned to them. But, you know, just to save yourself some stress, just if you have an ID, just apply it to one element on your page. It's just easier that way, really.
Sorry. The dot
Mhm.
class. So dot doesn't refer back to the button part of it. It's just saying that this dot refers to the class of button or the class of thumbnail.
That's a good question.
So you still have to describe what it is. The dot just refers it back to that class.
Let's put it this way. This dot, where's my mouse? There, oh, there it is. This dot refers to this attribute. This button is the value assigned to this attribute. Does that kind of clear things up?
I think I'll just see it later.
You will definitely, but I do appreciate that question. That's a really good one. Well, maybe this will even clear things up a little bit more. So we have these two attributes, class and ID. This hashtag or pound sign, whatever you want to call it, refers. Oh, that's so much better. Thank you. This pound sign refers to this ID. So if you see a dot, say hypothetically, let's say we put button where there's BIOS. We just erased this and we wrote button instead.
Yeah.
And then we have this in our CSS. This would be meaningless. This would not apply any style to this.
Dot button, hash button.
Yeah. Dot means class. Hash means ID. Yeah. And here's another example. Okay. So which takes precedence? Okay, now just bearing in mind, so we have a class. You can assign basically any number of elements to a class. This is also true of ID, but typically there's only one. Now, when we're talking about CSS, sometimes these things kind of conflict, and we have to decide which one's the most important. Now, I'm asking you to guess which one is more important in this case, a class or an ID? ID, definitely, yes. Why do you suppose that is?
Because the way that the functions would exist, if you only have it linking to one thing at a time, because of its very special function, the class you can apply to multiple things at a time, right? When you try to put an ID to multiple things, it can really mess up the way the style sheets work.
Certainly, and toward that, there's no reason why we can't have both a class and an ID attribute. So you'd have this general style applied to the element on your web page, but it might have some more specific function. For you have some other reason that you want to treat this one specially. You could have an ID, maybe it says BIOS, whoops, and you have a class. The ID then sets this one apart even to a greater degree. Yeah? All right. So ID comes first. That takes the top order. There should only be one. It's going to look at that one. It's going to style it according to the rules in ID first. Next comes class. Much more general application of styles, and it could apply in many different places. After that, the tags themselves. And there's actually it's not super complex, but there's this sophisticated way to determine and to calculate the points. So the one with the most points at the top is the one that gets styled first, and any sort of conflicting rules in lesser with CSS rules with fewer points kind of get cast aside. Something takes precedence. Now this is kind of I don't think that this is really going to impact you too much, especially not with the Finstagram, but it is something to be aware of. If you're setting your styles in a class and you can't figure out why this ID element isn't changing, that's why. It's because the class takes a lower precedence. So here's nested tags. I kind of skipped over one. So here's the next one. We're decreasing in order of specificity. There's only one ID, potentially many classes, potentially many tags, but of course these ones are set apart because the child tag is nested inside of a parent tag, and this one's going to be treated specially. So this A tag, for example, nested in presumably the nav bar at the top or the side of your screen, is going to take a higher precedence than whatever we set in just the general A tag, right? Maybe we don't want to see an underline every single time we hover over our mouse button. We can easily remove that. That might not be true at the top of the page in the nav bar. Maybe you put your mouse over top of it and it gets slightly bigger. You want that to happen in the nav bar, but you don't want to happen in the body of your document when people are just looking and reading the content of your page. So most specific, least specific. So you can change anything that you see. It's this, CSS is so very powerful and so very important. And I personally, I got a grasp of it, but there are people who make this their career. It is a very powerful thing. I find it very frustrating at times, but there you have it. You don't like the way it looks? There's nothing stopping you from making it different, except the complexity involved in making it different. Some very popular things to change right away. Text. So here's that famous A tag again. This is something that's going to link on our page. We want to change the color. Now I'm just kind of guessing. We got a lot of red and equal amounts of green and blue. I actually have no idea what that color would be. Any guesses? Doesn't matter. It's something, but it's something different than the default style. Text decoration. So now this, in this context, I think is just removing that underline, right? Typically, when you look at just a bare bones HTML page with the default styling, a link is always going to be colored blue and it's going to have a line underneath it. This takes that away. Font weight, make it bold, make it italic. What else can you do? Strike through, another very popular. Oh, actually, that's not a weight. Font weight. Basically the thickness of the font. But yeah, you can adjust that. Font size, make it bigger, make it smaller. And again, there's that 18 pixel, that measurement. All sorts of different units of measurement.
You could use any unit of measurement as long as the web browser will realize it, right?
Yeah, basically. But you're not going to see like centimeters or inches.
No.
You're going to see pixels, EMs, VHs, VWs. I'm not sure that those apply in font sizes, but the ones I typically use are EMs because it makes a big difference as to whether you're looking at it on your phone or you're looking at it on your desktop. And the EM kind of embodies that functionality. So it's going to adjust it much more appropriately than, say, if you got an 18 pixel font, it's probably going to be way too small on your phone, whereas it might look good on your desktop. Close it all off and so much more. So if you're really curious about an element or what can be styled, Google. All sorts of resources. You'll never remember it all. Just use it as a reference. And be aware that you can basically change everything. You could probably turn it upside down if you wanted to. So this, if you remember from the Chrome Inspector, this is heavily featured. Let's see if we can find something. Let's get rid of these guys. Here's the Chrome Inspector. Should be kind of familiar to you. So this is showing you the nature of the box in which this content is contained. Now this is awfully small. See if I make that a little bit bigger. I guess that's a little better. But let's find something to demonstrate what this actually does, if I can get it on the screen. Here we go. So I'm going to scroll down a little ways. There's going to be a link somewhere probably. Here we go. Films. Here's a menu. Notice here's that unordered list, but you don't see any bullets, right? So this is a product of that styling. We're going to look at the top link, and we'll just click that, and you can see the box highlighted on the screen. Let's take off that mobile view. You can kind of adjust things a little bit and just see what these individual settings actually do. Let's just do something really weird. Let's change the margin. We'll make it like 100 pixels. Didn't really do anything. Let's try down below. Let's make it even bigger. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's make it 200 pixels. Still didn't do anything. On the plus side, just to show that I'm not totally full of it, it is actually changing that inside style right there. So it is doing something. It's just not actually showing to the screen. Let's try border. This should put something around the outside, I'm hoping. I'll make it 2 pixels wide. Nothing. I didn't say 2 pixels. Well, it's not letting me do that. So this is pretty much the worst demonstration ever. Oh, something happened there.
Use some background padding.
Background. Well, it's not super important, but you did kind of see where. Now we have that wide box on the top. Yes, Nick?
If I'm not mistaken, you won't see any effects of padding unless you say they're important.
Oh, okay. Let's try that.
Sorry, did I say padding? I meant margin.
Unless there's a border.
Yeah. You have to make it like solid.
Oh yeah. Oh, I see. Oh, I get it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All that to say, if you're curious, it's going to give you these values, and you'll notice that you have some decimal values, some fractional values here as well. So this is a product of these responsive units of measurements. The EM probably being the most famous of those. It's going to take the size of your screen and it's going to calculate it appropriately, depending on whether it's landscape or if it's portrait, just depending on the screen. So that's probably something better left to the demonstration. Here is what that actually looks like in CSS. So we set the margin, supposed to have that outside spacing of 20 pixels so that nothing inside or nothing or surrounding it is going to encroach on that. This one in particular should have a black box, a solid line around it. And of course, you could change the style. It could be a dotted line, or like a more kind of like one of these Morse code type lines, dots and dashes. And if you want rounded corners instead of square corners, you declare a radius. We'll try some of this stuff coming up pretty fast here. Okay, so Chrome Inspector, we're actually just going to like make a new web page here. Now, would it be useful if I initialize the whole GitHub thing again, just as a refresher? Okay, I see some nodding at the back. I think this is valuable, even if you're too shy to nod your head. This stuff is not easy to learn the first time. So I'm going to go to my GitHub page. Oh, that's not GitHub. Go to GitHub. There we go. So this is a brand new project. You guys already have projects, and you're welcome to follow along just as a refresher, because this is the kind of stuff that takes a bit of time to get used to. So first thing I do is I create a new repository, and I will give this as descriptive a name as necessary. So this is week 2, day 1, CSS demo. Let's see some basic CSS. All right. This is probably pretty important for beginners, because if you don't initialize the repository with something in it, you're going to get this bare bones thing. And you're going to have to do a lot of stuff in Cloud9 or on your local machine to set that that endpoint, to provide it a place to push your application or your web page in this case. So click on the README and say create repository. So all this does is create a repository with one file in it, which is README. This just makes it easier to clone initially and to set it up in your development environment. Once you have that, you get the address of the repository, copy that from there, and go to Cloud9. So what we're going to do, of course, is you can call it doesn't have to be the same name, but I'm going to call it the same name. Week 2, day 1 CSS demo. For CSS demo. All right. And there, instead of putting, here, let's make this a little bit bigger. Instead of selecting a template in this case, you're just going to select your repository. And this does all that nice stuff of setting up that origin repository so that when you make those commitments, or you commit the changes, you can push it to GitHub. We'll do that right away just to refresh your memory. So you do all that, you create your workspace. This takes a few seconds, usually not more than 10, 20 seconds. There we go, not too bad. So I'm making a web page. Again, good refresher. What do I do first? Index. Create an index. So this is where, when people visit your site, this is the very first page that they're going to see. So again, I'll make this bigger. Just a couple of points bigger here. Okay. So right-hand click in that file tree area. Create a new file, index.html, which is what pretty much every web server ever created that always looks for that one first. So now what I like to do is I just like to plot out that basic skeleton. Not going to dwell on it on too long, so follow along if you can. And Cloud9, at this point, this is actually kind of helpful when it does some of the typing for you. After that, it gets kind of annoying sometimes. But as far as web pages go, you can't get much simpler than this. I'll put a title in there, say CSS demo. Okay, so now the rule is go slow. I don't know if this thing's actually going to work, and I want to make sure it does. This is a problem, actually, I struggle with all the time, is I'll often be working something locally on my desktop machine, and for whatever reason, when I actually put it on the internet, up in a server that's serving live information in the cloud or wherever, something weird happens. So I'm always kind of doing both things at once. Here I'm going to use probably the world's most famous web server, Apache. Start it up. And down here it gives you your own URL, and you can open that up. So not much happening here. All we did was set a title. I know it's working for two reasons. Well, I know at least that my title has been set, because up here you can see, oh, it's not getting the screen bigger, it's just making the page bigger. But you can see that the title I set is displayed. It's also a good idea to check the console output. So if I hold, well, there's a couple ways to do it. I'll show you the mouse way to do it. Right-hand click and click inspect. So here's your inspector demo. You've been getting this kind of pretty much every single day you've come here. Now I made it way too big. Let's make it smaller. But if there's any sort of errors, and now this becomes relevant now that you're going to be creating a CSS file, there's no guarantee that this thing actually got loaded. And the only way you're going to know for sure, at least in this case, is that it gave you an error on the console. Oh, I got a couple of errors. Failed to load resource. Favicon. Anyone know what the favicon is? That,
It goes at the top here.
exactly. This little orange box is a favicon. Same thing with Cloud. Is this Cloud 9? Yeah, Cloud 9's got its own favicon. This one was looking for a favicon just because that's the default set with Apache. I don't have one. But that is an error. What else do we have? Your authentication failed. Look at that. That's a weird one. I don't know what that means. Long story short, this isn't really impacting our page. We don't have a favicon. We didn't set one up. We didn't draw one in Photoshop or wherever you do this thing. Our page is working. The big error would be if it couldn't find our style sheet. So let's just do something really quick here. And we'll make a general hello world. So I'm just going to say H1 hello world. Go slow. Refresh. There we go. All right, and I'll put a little bit of text in there. I'll say, not much happening. We'd better add some substance to this page. So this is just going to kind of give us some stuff to work with. And I'm going to show you a little trick that I always resort to when just making, say, just a general web page as apart from a web application. So let's make sure that works. Go slow, don't do too much at once. Let's start dressing it up a bit. So a big part of what you do here, and I could show you the simple way, but I don't think that's going to serve you well when you're actually looking at your Finstagram application. So we're going to organize this in a much more professional way. Now, typically when you're doing this kind of thing, and you're going to see this in your Finstagram starter app, you organize certain things according to their function. Now, a style sheet is what we call an asset. So I'm going to create an empty folder called asset, just like that. Exact same way I created a brand new text file, index.html. Right-hand click. Of course, instead of saying new file, I say new folder. Then inside of that, I'm going to put another new folder. And I'm going to call it style sheets. Now you might have more than one, right? Now, especially if you're working with third-party packages. A very popular one is called Bootstrap. This is something that was created by Twitter. The idea is just to give you some basic styles beyond what is offered by the browser and get you up and running. So it also does nice stuff like drop-down menus for your top nav bar and all that kind of stuff. All that to say is that you might have more than one style sheet. And if you have that, then you want to start thinking about how you're going to organize this. Similarly, I don't think we're actually going to download an image, but I want to show you that at this point, well, where am I going to put my images? I'm going to put them inside of assets. You're going to see a parallel when you're looking at your Finstagram application. Also, another very popular thing to do. So I'm just kind of giving you, I showed you the skeleton of a web page. This is that back-end skeleton. This is how we organize our files. And I will say, okay, well, if I've got some JavaScript, you might call it JavaScript, or you could call it JS or whatever. This is how we organize it. Now, you guys have looked at Finstagram, right? This looks familiar to you? All right. So nothing magical about it, and you can organize it any way you want. This is pretty conventional. I'd say probably no matter where you go and what you look at, it's going to be something very similar to this. Now, I almost forgot. We've done a lot of work here. We don't want to lose it. So what do?
Get status.
Get. Let's push it to get. Very important. And when you're doing get, commit frequently. You make a little change and it, add something substantial, or it's a substantial change, even if it's a minor change, actually. Just come down here and push it to the repository. So the first thing I want to do is I want to see what actually changed. So I say get status. And I've got a whole bunch of empty directories. Git doesn't care about those just yet. Sorry, I'm trying to make this a little bigger. Why is that not getting bigger? That one gets bigger. That one doesn't get bigger. Okay, so I'll just repeat myself. So you're gonna have to squint your eyes and see if you can see what I'm doing here. But you'll see. So I typed in get space status, hit enter, and it's just telling me I've got one brand new file, index.html. It doesn't notice these ones just because there's nothing in it. Git doesn't care. That'll change when we add a style sheet. So I'm going to say git add, and then I tell it what file. There's also a shorthand. Does anyone remember what that is? A dot will work, yes. So you can give it the file name like this, and you can say dot like that. It's kind of hard to see there. I'll push the space bar a couple times. Or the other way, and this is especially useful if you delete a file, -A. This just takes everything that hasn't been tracked or it hasn't been committed, and it does it all at once. It adds everything all at once. Any one of those are going to serve the exact same purpose in this case. So I hit enter. Now get status doesn't actually change the state of your Git repository, but it does show you what you've done, what you have done to change it. So in this case, before I had index.html and nothing was happening, right? Now it's turned green and it says, well, you've got a new file. We don't know anything about it, but we're going to start tracking it as of this point because you just added it. So what comes next? Commit, yes. Not ready to push quite yet. So we say git commit space -m, and just because I think I'm funny, I say hello index.html like that. Give yourself a short message. It can be something similar. It can be something different. Give me a brief description of what you did. Well, it's not for my benefit. This is for your benefit, so you can go back and look at the changes that you made. So now, because I'm kind of compulsive this way, I like to type in git status again. It says, okay, well, everything's ready to go, but your local repository, because remember, these are both Git repositories. The one sitting here on Cloud 9 is one commit ahead. I don't know if you can read that, but it says you're one commit ahead from your origin repository. That's the one on GitHub. And I know this because I've got all these directories and I've got an index.html file. And if I come to GitHub, I don't have any of that. I just have this README file. Okay, so coming back to Cloud 9, finally, I'm going to get this thing off site. I'm going to push it to somewhere else in the so-called cloud. Git push, and this is a first-time thing, origin master. Origin is GitHub. Master is the one you're working on here on Cloud 9. After you've done this one time, you don't really have to do it again. You can just use the shorthand. You say git push because it knows that you want to push here locally up to GitHub just by default. So enter your password. Enter your username first. This is your GitHub username. Now this tripped up a couple of people last day. When you type in your password, you're not going to see anything. It kind of looks like the computer hanged itself. Nothing's happening. The reason is just because you don't want people looking over your shoulder and seeing what you're typing in. So here I am typing in my password. nothing's happening to the screen. Ah, I typed it in wrong. If only I could see what I was typing. Oh, I did it again. Hang on. All right, let's see if I can remember my password. Oh, there we go. Okay. So it does it, gives you this little cryptic success message. If you're really kind of doubtful of what happened there, just go to GitHub, press refresh, and voila. There we are, index.html. So this is what I just created for you guys. All right, so let's get down some actual CSS. First thing I want to do, though, I think, is typically when I'm making a web page, now again, this is just mostly personal style, but I like it when people come to my web page and the whole screen is filled with one image. I don't know if that's like a signature or if that's what other people do. That's just what I like to do. So I'm going to find an image, and we're going to kind of make use of this directory structure that we've created for ourselves. What's a good image? I used like the Grapes of Wrath last day. Huh. Okay, we'll use the Grapes of Wrath band instead of the book. See some pictures of Jerry Garcia. Let's see, what do we got? There they are. None of these are particularly funny. Oh, the Sex Pistols. Okay, let's use these guys. Totally different. We're going off. Oh, no. Okay, the problem with this one is I want this one to fill up the entire screen, right? This one's not going to work so good because it's only, you can't really see it, but it's only 480 by 251 pixels. So this is actually even pretty small by your cell phone screen standards. If I try to stretch this out over the top, over like a desktop screen, it's going to look terrible. It's going to look all pixelated. So I want to find a nice big image. Maybe I should, that's a small one. Oh, well, that one's nice and big. Okay, so this one, much larger. Can't really see it, but it's, what does it say? I can't even see it. 1700 by 1100 roughly. So this is going to be nice and big. So if we stretch it a little bit, it's not going to get too pixelated. I'm going to show you how to steal this image. You probably already know. You might not know how to get it into Cloud9 though. So I'm going to grab these guys. And I'm going to take this, I'm just going to copy the URL. So I'm just viewing the image as it's served up on the web. I come back to Cloud9 and I want to put it in my images directory. Any idea how to get it in there? How do I download it from there and put it into Cloud9?
Paste it right in.
Can't do, well, you actually might be able to. I'm going to show you the way a real developer does it. So I'm going to change my directory because here I am sitting here at the bottom. And hopefully you can see that way at the back. But I'm sitting where the same spot where index.html is. But I've got this nice directory structure that I've created to keep my web page organized. I want to put it in images. So down here on the command line, I'll reset so it's like a little bit higher on the screen. I'm going to try another vain attempt at making this bigger. Still nothing. What does that do? Is that bigger or is that worse? All right. All right. Let's say I want to change into assets. So here's a command called cd. And then I want to change into images. Makes sense. This is where I want to store my picture of the Grapes of Wrath. So now you see how the directory or the command prompt changed. Before I was just sitting in this workspace directory where everything's being served from. But now I'm sitting in these nested directories, assets/images. So you can use, this is something that's typically built into Linux. I sure hope it is in this case. wget, W-G-E-T. Paste the URL, hit enter, and there we go. The whole thing just got sucked up into my Cloud9 workspace. Now if I type in LL again, There it is. That's a very big image. Normally, I'd use something called Image Magic to make this thing a little bit smaller for the web. This is something you definitely want to consider. We don't have these utilities on Cloud9 that I'm aware of. Actually, let's find out. No, don't have those kind of utilities. So now I'm sitting here. I don't really want to be here. I want to go back up a couple steps. This is all very relevant. Yes, Nick.
I just thought of how to do it. You want to change the size of the terminal?
Yeah.
You can go to Cloud9.
Okay.
So make that small. Just look at Cloud9 preferences. The Cloud9. Back to the file. The second one.
Preferences. So Nick is showing us how we can shrink the size of this image.
Or sorry, not the no. Make your terminal larger.
Oh, okay. So, okay.
On the left, if you scroll down to editor, is terminal. Or sorry, open user settings.
On the left, user settings. Okay.
Click on it. And scroll down to editors, terminal.
Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. Okay, so let's make. I'm making it smaller. Jeez. All right. Okay, that's a little bit more reasonable, I think. It's kind of crowding us off the screen. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. Okay, so all I want to do, though, is like I'm sitting in this weird asset/images directory. I just want to go back. And it's already been observed if I want to go back a directory, remember how I was talking about this? ... So cd space ... and I want to go up 2. So I'm going to use slash and then another ... Because remember how I got here. I said cd/asset, or sorry, cd asset/images. So I'm going to go back up 2 directories. Very useful stuff. Okay. So now I have this image. I want to set this as the background. Now this is where the actual CSS stuff is coming in finally, right? Jeez. Waiting all this time for a class and a lecture on CSS, and I'm just getting to it now. So inside of this style sheet directory, I'm going to create a new file. What you call it doesn't really matter. It should make sense. I think the slide called it lib, L-I-B .css. So I'm going to adopt that convention. I'm just going to call it that. Usually when I'm doing an app, I call it app.css or main.css, lib.css in this case. Call it what you want. So I've got this. What can we do? Let's set the background. We're going to set it to that picture that we downloaded. So okay, we'll take a little bit of a shortcut here. So I'm just going to style the entire body. Not a good idea. I might change this around a little bit just to, again, by way of demonstration. But I have this tag, and I can use it as a selector. So I declare that here, body. And everything I want to change is going to be inside of these curly braces. And again, so Cloud9 can be very helpful. Gave me the closing CSS brace. Make sure you go nice and slow. Make sure that all this kind of stuff is happening. All I want to do is set the background image property. Oops, where did I go? There we are. And this is, again, another place where Cloud9 is very helpful. So you start typing, it gives you some nice options. So, and also a very good reference. If you're not exactly sure what you can change, just start typing something. It'll give you some ideas. So now when I'm doing this, now I got to point it to where my picture is actually living. Use this URL command. And then any guesses? You guys are all reasonably computer savvy, given that this is the 21st century. How do I tell? I know it's sitting here. How do I express that in just ordinary type, like what we did on the command line?
could again use the dot 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 slash dot 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 to scroll down.
So I'm sitting here. This is where I currently am, where this index is. Or actually, oh no, you're right. Yes. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. So I'm sitting here in style sheets. I've got to go up and then into images. So dot dot slash images. And then I give it the file name. Grapes of wrath.jpg. Just like that. And notice here I didn't actually even use quotations. It's not always necessary, right? Like this, very different things takes a long time to figure out where it is and isn't necessary. I'm still missing something. And this, I didn't actually stress this. Any guesses as to what I'm missing? It's a hard one.
Link within our actual page.
No, it's just syntax. I didn't expect you guys to actually know this, but I need a semicolon. Right? So you don't see this in HTML, but you see this in CSS. Every time you set a property and you assign it that value, you got to end it off with a semicolon. Why? That's just the way it is. So I save it. Still nothing going to happen. I can go here. I can press refresh. I can make sure everything's okay, and it basically is. But what do I do? What do I do now?
You just created the style sheet. You haven't actually put it into your.
You have to link it to your index.
Have to link it to my index. Thank you, guys. So I come back to index, and in the head, remember, I use this tag. I can never remember. Okay, link, what is it, rel? Rel equals style sheet. What's the next one? Make sure you spell it right. Look what I almost did. Style sheet. What's the next one? href. Is it? href? Okay. href. Now, having seen how I accessed that Grapes of Wrath image, what path do I put here? Help me out here. So you remember I had to start, had to go up a directory using dot dot. Do I need to go up a directory this time? No, I don't think so. Where do I have to go first? I'm down here. Asset, yeah. In this case, it's probably a good idea to put a / on that. Yes, let's do that. I meant to actually call that assets, but I called it asset. Oh well. And then style sheet. And then lib.css. Got to be very mindful of these things. You screw up one character, you miss something, you add something extra, doesn't work. Okay, so at this point, we do have something. We have an actual style sheet, we have an image, and it's now connected to our index.html page. Let's keep our fingers crossed, going slow. Press refresh. Oh, didn't work. It's a good thing I had the console open. It says asset style sheet lib.css is not found. Why? Actually, I have no idea why. Let's figure it out. I think it might have something to do with this. Actually, no, that shouldn't make a difference. Oh, I see it. I see at least one potential problem. I missed something.
You didn't put an S on your style sheet.
Exactly. See how easy it is to mess up? This is why you go slow.
Same with your folder link.
Well, I didn't. I actually meant to put an asset.
No, I meant like style sheets there, and then look at style sheet there again.
Oh, I don't think this one needs an S.
Okay.
I might be wrong about that, but let's try it. So I messed up the path to the file, though, for sure. There we are. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, we got something. The Grapes of Wrath are in the background of this body. Okay, fantastic. But we can't see our text. Now here's a great opportunity to apply some more CSS. So let's come back to Cloud 9. Now looking at this, I've got an H1 and a P tag. How do I style H1 start? Remember, we're going slow. I'm going to go to my CSS file. And you guys are going to guide my fingers. What do I type in? Selector first. H1. Curly brace. Now, you probably don't know the property offhand. It is actually just color. And just to start, I'm gonna make it white because it's kind of a dark black background. This should stand out nicely. So I'm just going to make it FF. That's white. The highest concentration of color. All right. Press refresh. All right. Starting to look pretty good. Not bad. All right, let's do the same thing for the P tag. Now, there's a couple of ways I can do this. There's nothing stopping me from doing this. This will work. But we can also take a shorthand. Now, this depends, this may change as your project gets bigger. But there's nothing stopping you from doing this. I can take this out, save myself a few lines of code, and separate these with commas. Now notice this is a little bit different. I'm going to see if I can cook up an example on the fly here as to why there's a distinction here. If I didn't have that comma, this would mean an entirely different thing. Can anyone tell me what would happen, or not what would happen? What does it mean if I don't have that comma? It would mean that the P tag is nested inside the H1 tag. Okay, we can actually do we can do a demo on that as well. Oops. Okay, so this should all be the same. Yep, no errors. Everything's still, the color's right. So now this is a much bigger picture than what I need. I can apply some more CSS properties, or I can change them so that I can squish more of it onto the screen, make it so that we can see more of the band. Now, there's no way that you're ever going to know this just like being able to infer it. Let me just show you. I just want to cover the entire background. Whoops. So, right, background size. Who would have guessed that you could do this? Nobody, right? It's not intuitive at all. You just kind of have to be familiar, and you have to know the resources, and you have to know that it is possible. So if you didn't know this because I showed it to you, you would just go to Google and you say, well, how do I cover the background with one image or something like that? So let's see what the difference is here. Save it. Press refresh. Okay, so you can see a little bit more of the band. Here's an important point to consider. This isn't always true, but a lot of the time, and especially me personally, when I'm looking at a web page, it's usually not on my desktop or my laptop. It's usually I'm out with friends or we're doing something, and I'm looking at it on my phone. Very important thing to consider. This is what it looks like on the phone. And start from this point. It's just called mobile first, right? This is just what we do. Make sure it looks good on the phone, and then we get bigger, or we change it accordingly as the screen size gets bigger. Still got a problem here, and it might not be one that you're really anticipating. What if, we'll take that off right now. Oh, actually, no. This is awfully small, right? We should make this bigger for the phone. Again, you probably wouldn't know how to do this, like unless someone was showing you, unless you know that it's possible. And that's really the key. It is possible. it is possible to make the text bigger on a smaller screen and make it smaller on a bigger screen, which is kind of what we want here. So let's come back to here. The style I want to apply first is this H1. So, this is kind of dumb. We'll take out the hello world. And this is going to be my Grateful Dead. Can't say I'm really a fan. Okay, I'm a fan. This is my Grateful Dead fan page. So I changed that a little bit. Now I need to make this a little bit bigger on the phone. Come to my CSS, style H1, and actually we can apply this both to the H1 and the P tag. Well, this is where we're going to have to split these up, but let's see what happens. So we say font size. And up until now, you've only seen that PX. And let's just try it out. So I'm going to set it to, I don't know, we'll say 24 pixels. And you're going to see the difference here. Refresh. It's a little bit bigger. Let's make it even huger. Let's just to make this dramatic demonstration. We'll make this 72 pixels. It's not going to be like out of control or anything, but it's going to be much, much bigger. There we go. So that's actually pretty reasonable for the phone. It's easy to read. It's not too bad. I turn it off. Oh, it's huge. Actually, I wasn't even expecting that. Oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. What I really wanted to show you, though, is this thing, the EM. Now, this gives you something relative to the screen size. So you start with like these small values. Let's see the difference here. I'm actually not sure what EM stands for. Ah, that's no good. Let's make it bigger. Grateful Dead fan page. Let's try this. 5EM. Oh, I just blew it. Okay, well that makes it way big. Had the same problem I did before. We're too early to get into the query stuff. Okay. Let's just leave it here for now. This is advanced CSS, and if I tell you all about it now, it's going to be super boring in a couple of days. So we'll just leave this at 2, like this. Problem here is, of course, that the H1 and the P tag are the same size. That's kind of dumb. P tag should be much smaller. So this would be a good point to separate these guys. And there's nothing wrong with changing these things as you go. As the project changes, these things will necessarily change as well. So I'm just going to take this off, and now it's going to go back to that default size. But that should give you a good clue for when we get into that advanced CSS or that mobile stuff. It is possible, right? So how do you do a device query? Media query. So if you're really interested, look how to do a media query. It's all in CSS. We'll get to that another day. There is a problem I don't think you anticipated, though. So right now, the entire body of my web page is filled with this picture of this band. I'll do one more demonstration. I'll let you guys get to playing with this stuff yourself. If I have more content, let's just put a whole bunch of the same stuff here. I'm just trying to fill up space. Watch what happens. Oh, there we go. I was hoping it would repeat. Let me just do a whole bunch of other stuff. Blah, 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 blah. Here we go. Oh, it's still covering. So the picture gets bigger and the entire body. Really all I want it to do, though, is have it so when you land on the page, you see the picture, you scroll down, you get to some different content. So this is where that class or that ID selector comes into play. Let's come back to our demo. Take all this stuff out. Don't want that. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to create a div, and we're going to give it an ID. So there's only going to be one of these things. And I'm going to call it landing. So just meaning that, this is where when the user visits, who's ever coming to your website, this is what he's going to see first. Give it descriptive names. Now notice that in CSS, I use that hashtag to signal that this is an ID. You don't do that in the HTML. That is to say, I don't put the hashtag like that. That's reserved for CSS. I take out that hashtag, right? So then down here, I want to add something different. This is what I see when I scroll down. So this isn't going to work right away. We still got a few things to do. I'm just kind of showing you a very common trick that I employ. Refresh, make sure it's all working. Okay, so not quite doing what we want. We still got that problem that the entire, actually it's not the entire body anymore. Somehow we've got to get this part to fill up that whole page, make the box extra big, and push this down to what we can't see, everything here. So I don't want to see this yet. I only want to see this when I actually scroll down. To do that, first thing I got to do is I've actually got to style the div. So currently right now, I'm styling the body, but I just want to style the landing page. Because if it's styling the body, the whole thing's going to be occupied by the Grateful Dead. We only want one box, not the entire all-encompassing box. So this is where the hashtag comes in. Landing. Just like that. So it's not going to change much. It's still going to be basically the same thing, but I like to make sure that it's all working. And it is. Note the difference here. My text is white. That's no good. What can I do to fix that? We'll get to that in a second. So what I need to do is make this landing div fill up the entire screen. And I can use one of these. I was going to try to blow your minds with this 2EM, and I kind of got ahead of myself. There's another unit of measurement called VH, which just stands for vertical height. So 100 vertical height means take a look how big the screen is and just fill it accordingly. Save. Make sure it works. Oh, starting to look pretty good. Of course, I still can't see my text because it's all white, right? White on white background. Any guesses as how I would set, or how would I fix this problem? I got a couple options. I can either change the color of the text, or I could change the body of the background. Let's say I want to change the body background. How do I do that? Any guesses? Not guesses, you guys should know. Take an educated guess.
You do essentially the same thing as the top right there, but just tell it body as a selector.
Body is a selector, yep. So not quite the same, but yes, we declare the body. Just take a guess. If I wanted to style the background color, what do you think?
On background?
Background color. Oh, right. So when you're doing this kind of stuff just in an ordinary text editor, it's not going to give you these helpful hints. But this is one of the nice things about Cloud9. And I'm going to call it, I don't know. There's some shorthand ones. We could just say, this might actually work, dark blue. I'm not sure, but let's try it. So rather than messing around with like the hexadecimal code, yeah, that looks pretty good, right? So it lands here. Same thing on my screen. I scroll down and then I can see that dark blue background. Still looks kind of weird though. I mean, as a professional web developer, I wouldn't be super happy about this blue border around my landing screen. Again, I'm not going to ask you guys to make an educated guess. This is just something that you kind of have to know and be aware that it is possible. Let's see now. Let's see if I can figure it out. Hang on. So this is where we get into those margins. This was another failed attempt at demonstrating this. But if I look at my body, so I'm selected like the biggest box on the screen, and I can come down here and I can see these different values here. So this is the thing itself. If I set one of these values, maybe the margin, what's the margin at? I can't even read that. The margin's at 8. If I set it to 0, that blue box should disappear. Kind of guessing. So we come back and we say margin 0. I don't think we need to add the PX in this case, but again, this is just something you can try. Let's see if I got the desired results. Yeah, looks good, right? Whole thing disappeared. And when I scroll down, there it is. So you kind of see this, I think this is kind of a common thing you see on web pages. It's very rudimentary, of course, but this is kind of how I like to style mine personally. Anything else I can show you here? Well, we could probably keep doing this forever and ever. But you guys got stuff to do. And you're going to learn far more by trying to do this yourself. Okay, so now before I just cut you loose here, are there any questions about what you've seen? Has this been helpful? Oh, we forgot something.
Oh,
We forgot to push it to GitHub.
yeah.
Right. We better practice. Okay. Type in git status. I'll go right up to the top. Remember, this is actually very important. This is as important as you're writing your doctoral dissertation and pressing save every time you add a new paragraph, right? It's like hitting Control S all the time. I'm sure we're all in the habit of working on a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint or whatever we're doing, and always habitually hitting Control S, right? Same thing with GitHub. Do it frequently. Make frequent commits. So I kind of broke that rule doing this demonstration. I see the different things I've done. So we are tracking index, but we're not tracking this asset folder. The only reason we see it now is because I've added a couple things. Added an image, and I added lib.css. So how do I add everything? Yep, that'll do. You could also do the period, the dot. So I type in git status. All that stuff changes to green. So I've added a new file down here, this Grapes of Wrath JPEG, the CSS, and I added the index file, which I changed. Probably the better thing to do would have been to add the index file and say, okay, well, I added some content here, but this is what we're working with now. So let's say get commit -m. So what did I do? I changed the background, changed the landing page, and added an image with style. I don't know, something like that, right? I'm trying to add too much here. I did too much stuff, trying to get it all in one sentence. So everything's committed, and just because I'm a creature of habit, I type in git status. Yeah, it looks pretty good, saying I'm ahead by one commit. Now remember, before I had to say git push, I had to do this. This will also work, but you don't need to do that anymore. You did it once, it knows where you're pushing it. It's going to know that until you change it. So then type in your username. And there you have it. That picture is really big. For you aspiring web developers, make sure that you reduce the quality. And with JPEG specifically, you can get it down to 70% quality, and pretty much no one's going to notice. So just something to keep in mind when you're doing this kind of stuff.
You could use Outboard software to do that for you before you put your images.
I use one called Image Magic. Now, this is a command line tool. It's open source. I believe it's under the GNU license, which means it's very restrictive. I wouldn't call it beginner friendly, but you guys are all perfectly capable. And if you are interested, I can show you how to use it. There's one command called convert, which I always do to take a large image. I reduce it down to about 1200 pixels in width, reduce the quality, strip out all the metadata, just makes it a lot smaller, makes your website pop when like people visit it. Because otherwise you got like a 1 megabyte picture. In this case, it was pretty fast, but just imagine on your phone. You don't want people downloading a megabyte on their phone, right? Then their data is going to go through the roof. Things to bear in mind. All right.